I'm going to talk to you about the mummy's voice. But in order to do that, I'm going to start by explaining what we do in voice science that has allowed us to do the work that we did on the mummy's voice. So, this is what we're going to talk about. We're first of all going to look at how the voice works, because everybody in here has a voice, and I'm sure you use them. We're going to look at how the human voice is resilient in challenging situations. And then we're going to look at the mummy and how we created a sound from the mummy. So that's the agenda. And finally, if there's time, I'm going to throw in some healthy voice tips, things you can do to keep your voice working nicely. So firstly, let's just look at how do we create sound in the human body. And there are three things that are relevant. The first is we have two lungs. The second is that we have vocal folds in the larynx in the neck, sometimes called the vocal cords. And the last thing is we have the tube above the larynx going to the mouth and the nose, which we call the vocal tract. And it is by moving the vocal tract around and by adjusting the vocal folds and by adjusting breathing in the lungs that we can create sound. So here is a kind of acoustic model of what's going on. And I'm not going into a lot of detail because time's not with us, but the first thing to say is I'm calling the lungs the power source, being an engineer, but that diagram does not mean that the left and right lung work differently. It's illustrating the two ways in which the lungs work. One is like a blacksmith's bellows. It's like this action I'm doing with my hands, and it's caused by your rib cage, which is like bucket handles. As you breathe in, the bucket handles move upwards, so they stretch the lungs front and back, and then they move downwards. So the next time you see a skeleton, just look at the ribs. They're angled downwards, and we can pull the whole lot up, which expands our lungs. We can also expand the lungs downwards with this piston in a cylinder using the diaphragm muscle, the largest muscle in the human body. That produces air pressure. And the air pressure is what drives the air moving past the vocal folds in the neck. So a pistons and bellows action is how we power the system. Then we have the vocal folds. Could you play the video in the middle, please? This is a front view of how the vocal folds vibrate. You'll notice they meet at the bottom. Air is moving upwards, so the meeting point is moved upwards, and they part at the top. That is healthy vocal fold vibration. We're born with it. We don't need to learn how to do it. It's one of the first things we do when we enter the world is we probably scream our head off, and the midwife says, fine. You engage your larynx as one of the first things you do. Regular vibration, but there's an interesting issue here. We have evolved with two vibrating elements. And of course, being made of human tissue, if one of them is injured and the other one isn't, they don't vibrate cleanly together, and you tend to get the voice doing this sort of thing, which normally means that one of the vocal folds is no longer vibrating in synchrony with the other one. And that's what causes the voice often to go hoarse, crackly, creaky, uncomfortable, sore throat, all those things, when there's something wrong in the neck, but we're never quite sure what. Now, one of the things we do, of course, when we speak and sing is we change the pitch. So as I'm speaking to you now, I can change my pitch over a very, very, very wide range if I want to. And of course, if you were to sing, you would find that the composer has written notes, and you follow the notes to get the pitches of the song. And the way we do this is that the bottom right-hand picture is a look down on the vocal folds, but the nose is pointing that way. So my head is kind of like that. And what we've got are two vocal folds, which are muscles, And these muscles can be stretched, because if you look at the top diagram, which is a side view, the whole of the front of the vocal folds, the thyroid cartilage, angles forwards, and it stretches the vocal folds as it does so. So when I go, ah, I'm stretching my vocal folds by angling the thyroid cartilage forwards to stretch the folds. Bit like tuning a guitar. Tighten the string, the pitch goes up, slacken the string, it goes down. Now, it is possible if you go to a hospital with a problem with your vocal folds, the doctor will look at them. And the way the doctor looks at them is with a thing called an endoscope, a nase endoscope. It goes up the nostril to the back of the nose, and it stops where that green arrow is at the end there. So it's looking down on the vocal folds, and it sees the picture I've got there. So it's a bit like looking down on the model. And if you wouldn't mind playing that video, this is a normal vocal fold vibration. It's that, yeah, thank you. Going up in pitch? See how flexible they are? This is a professional singer, but that huge change, and we can do this. It's the first thing we do when we enter the world, is we exercise our vocal folds, and we generally move the pitch around. But you can have problems whilst I'm here, and one of the problems is what are known as nodules or polyps. You may have heard of these, and if you look at the picture on the right, can you see in the middle there are two bumps that oppose each other, and they prevent the vocal folds closing properly, and they cause them to vibrate like this. Would you play that video, please?
Slow motion replay shows up the breaks in vibration indicative of a certain rigidity in the area of the nodular thickening. The voice quality is decidedly husky.
Okay, so you've probably heard people that have that. There are various things that cause that. Smoking can cause that. Dry atmosphere can cause that. Talking very hard without drinking enough water. And if you want some vocal advice, if you're into using your voice, you cannot drink enough water for speech. You cannot drink enough water. You might end up going to the loo, but you need a lot of water to lubricate the vocal folds. So let's just have a listen to what the vocal folds sound like. And the reason I'm doing this is it explains how we made a sound from the mummy. So this is the first bit, which is directly involved with the mummy. So would you mind playing the top one? Okay, turn the volume down. This is me singing a song, and I'm being recorded by a pair of electrodes on my throat, a device called an electroglottograph, which records the opening and closing of the folds. Because electrically, if the folds are together, you complete a circuit at RF radio frequencies, and if they're apart with an air gap, you get less conduction. And you can use that to record the vocal folds. What I actually sang, if you'd play the bottom video briefly. As the blackbird in the spring 'neath the willow tree. And while I'm here, this is actually a barbershop song, and I enjoy singing. So I'm going to play you now, for the first time on this planet, me singing, and I'm accompanied by, next slide, yep, my other three larynxes singing the other three parts. As the blackbird in the spring 'neath the willow tree sat. Turn it down a bit. So it's me singing and three larynx devices. I've done a multi-track recording. Turn it back up. Orally, orally, made with golden hair. Sunshine came along with thee, and swallows in the air. Next slide, please. So you get the idea. Yeah, that's called the voice source, is what's going on in here. And then we have the vocal tract, which allows us to create sound. Now, in passing, some recent research has shown something rather curious. This plot here, which is back to front, it's blue for girls and pink-red for boys. I thought I'd swap the colours around. It shows the average vibration frequency of your pitch with age, going from 0 to 100 years old. And the thing to notice here is that from birth, in the first few years of life, your pitch comes down quite dramatically because the whole body is growing, including the vocal folds. You then have a period around about the age of 10 to 15 where boys' voices, in English often we say break, it's an unfortunate term, but we say break. Transform is a better version. So the red line, you'll notice, comes down further than the blue line. But for those of you that are getting on towards being as old as me, and I'll let you guess that, I'm not going to tell you, you'll notice if you go to the right-hand end that the male voice goes up in pitch and the female voice continues to come down from about the age of 60. So there's a kind of what I like to call an alpha and an omega of life. We start with the same pitch, fundamental frequency at 500, and if you live to be 100, we die with the same frequency. Now, to illustrate that, would you play the female line, the blue one? This, just hang on, this has a click in it, and 20 years have gone by, and it's playing the average pitch. And the male one? And just for fun, we'll play both together. Is this modern music? I don't know. But what it shows is that the pitch of all our voices, the average fundamental frequency of all our voices, is changing, particularly at life start and to some extent at life end. So if you're a singer, sing in a choir, be aware that your average fundamental frequency, comfort of singing notes, varies certainly at the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Here we have an E vowel, next one, and an R vowel, and next one, an U vowel. Now, if you'd like to just make those shapes in your mouth of R, E, U, just move your mouth around and reflect on these scans, which are cut through the middle of the head, as to the shape of your tongue. And you should find that for E, the tongue is humped quite high in the mouth. For R, the tongue is open at the front and the mouth opens, and for U, the lips come up a bit and the tongue is pushed back a bit. And the way we pronounce our vowels is the same across the world. Now, different languages use slightly different versions of E, R, and U, yes, but every vocal tract can create every vowel in the language because we all do it using exactly the same structures. So we can create sound and vowel sounds specifically by changing the shape. So here we have, yep, and another one, and another one. Here are some tubes that are often used to create vowels. You can make acrylic tubes and put a buzz in one end and you get the vowels. Didn't bring those with me because I was worried about what the customs people might think about and they might not actually get out of the airport. Next one. So these are called the resonances of the vocal tract. The real name is formant, and what they are peaks in what's called the acoustic response curve of the sound. Now, in practice, what that is, it's exactly the same you can think of as being in a big room or a little room. So you can think of it, if you're in an E room and you're near this end of the E room, it's nice and tall. But if you're in the R room and you're at this end, it's quite narrow. And those shapes change, the acoustics change, which is why R, E, U sound different, and we recognize them as vowels. Next, please. Okay, now I want to talk to you briefly about evolved human resiliences, which is a topic that I find intriguing because it looks at how we communicate with each other in different situations, that we've evolved strategies to account for that. Yes, please. So these are the three resiliences. You can probably tell where the mummy comes in these. So I'm going to look briefly at sounds in the environment. How do we deal with those? How do we deal with talking to many people without one of these things? So no microphone, no loudspeakers. You're outside, you're going to shout a warning to a field full of footballers. How do you do it? And finally, to look at the mummy. Yes, please. So, what do we do about sounds in the environment? Okay, let's put a few of these up. That's it. So, firstly, we evolved voices to communicate with each other. And we can deal with different acoustic situations. We can deal with long distances, to a degree. We can't do 5 miles, but we can do fairly long distances. We can do echoes. If you're in caves that have a big reverberation, there are ways of dealing with that, which we naturally do. We can also deal with competing noises. And there are some very definite competing noises, like, for example, major weather events, lightning, thunder, well, thunder in particular, high winds, other human beings speaking, shouting, talking, and animals speaking, shouting, talking. And we have an evolved redundancy in our communication that helps us with this. So what I want to offer you is this idea that we can take a speech signal and in frequency terms, it's normally up that way, we can put a filter in the middle of the speech signal and listen either to this bit under here or that bit over there, and you can still understand the message. The implications of that are that you can remove the bottom, the low frequencies, or you can remove the high frequencies, and you can still hear what's being said. So could we play the top loudspeaker?
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind.
And now the bottom one.
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind.
Okay, now the first one sounds like a slightly boomy version of normal speech. The second one is odd. You don't hear that very often. But these two are filtered, if you're into the technical bit, at 1500 hertz. So if you take 1500 hertz and take a low-pass filter, which is the bottom one, or 1500 hertz and take a high-pass filter, which is the top one, either of them are understandable. So if you have a competing noise that's typically boomy in the low frequencies, our vocal signal, which has both of these in it all the time, can still be heard, and vice versa. Just play them again, would you?
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind.
There was once a young rat named Arthur who could never take the trouble to make up his mind.
And that second one might sound to you a little bit like early telephones, because the telephone has been designed to minimize the amount of what's called bandwidth on the phone line so that they can stack loads of phone calls onto a pair of wires. I mean, mobiles don't work like that, but that was done years ago. The pictures on the right-hand side are what are called spectrogram analyses, just showing the picture of the top one, it's all in the low end, and the bottom one. And if anyone's wondering why the bottom one looks as if it's got more information, it actually hasn't. It's because that's on a linear scale, and we normally think logarithmically. And I'll confess, I didn't have time to make log spectrograms, so we'll ignore that. So we've evolved this redundancy over millennia, and we use it. We all use it quite naturally. Okay, so the one thing we don't have is resilience to human-made sounds. Because on the evolutionary timescale, thousands of years, if not tens of thousands of years, is not anywhere near the human scale. Even if you look at the human scale of designing large cannons, large guns, but particularly electronics. So, I mean, although there were amplifiers at the end of the 19th century, they weren't very common. But now they are, and we use earbuds, we use phones, we go to concerts, we listen to loudspeakers. And you can damage your hearing as a result, and it is becoming a major threat to hearing. So the threats are machinery in factories and elsewhere, for which there are laws, and there are, in Britain, there's the Factory Health and Safety Act, which you have to keep the sound level below a certain level. You can very easily calculate what level is safe. I won't do it now in the lecture, but we can talk about it afterwards. On your mobile phone, you can get a dB meter, decibel reading meter, and they're free. It will tell you how many dB are in. The Apple phone does it anyway, but other phones have apps. From that, you can look up on a table how long it is safe to listen to sounds at that level. And for every 3 dB you add to it by turning the volume up, you halve the length for which it's safe. And it's scary. I did it once it was a disco at a conference, and I was measuring levels which told me I could stay safely in that area for about 30 seconds. So I left and went and had a beer instead. And what I say to my students is, you only have one pair of ears, and if they are deafened inside in the cochlea, that cannot be mended. Cochlear implants do not mend. Cochlear implants give you an alternative route which is less than satisfactory. Next slide. So there is a warning message here. Human-made hearing damage is not protected by evolutionary variation. It's in our control. So I just leave that with you. If you're worried and want to have a chat afterwards, please do. Yes, thank you. So the resilience too. We can make ourselves heard over long distances and to many people. And we all know how to do this, even if you've never trained for it. We all know how to shout. An opera singer has to sing over a huge orchestra. So if I'm on an opera stage, you would all be the orchestra, and the audience would be out there about 5 or 6 times further away. Opera singers do not wear microphones. They do it all naturally with their voices. And there's a specific thing that they do, which I'm going to show you. People who call, shout, have also learnt to do it, and to some extent we naturally do it. So they don't strain their voices to be loud. Next, please. They focus the sound into the ear's most sensitive region. This is something we've evolved. We actually all know how to do it. If you were in serious distress or being seriously threatened and you scream at somebody, you could be an opera singer. Probably an opera singer with one note, but nevertheless, you know the basic mechanism, and we can all naturally do it. Next slide, please. How does it work? Okay, this is how it works. You know what these are? Yep, front row, you know what these are? Yep, and what's the one in the middle? Can you remember? It was on That's our larynx. That's this bit here. Yep. And the thing is, we have ear canals. So from the outside world to the tympanic membrane, here's the outside world, there's the tympanic membrane, and that blue arrow shows a little chamber. It's a little cylinder. And we have 2 of them. There's one on each side. And they're the same size, give or take. Turns out they've evolved to be the same size as a chamber immediately above the vocal folds, which are here, in the larynx before the sound gets out into the vocal tract. That's another thin tube. That means that the sound we make from the larynx is colored by the frequency response of that tube, which enhances a certain region in what's known as the spectrum, and the ear is very sensitive to that region because it too has tubes at that same resonant frequency. So when I do that, which is ridiculous actually, I'm sorry, I forgot for a moment I had a microphone on. Just turn the microphone off. So when then you can hear that it probably rings a bit in your ears because your ears are resonating similar to my larynx as it resonates. And that's the trick that opera singers learn to do. Next slide, please. So here is an example of it. In fact, this is an example taken from girl choristers in a cathedral in Britain on some work that we did looking at them developing a sung sound. And it's not just opera singers, they also develop a solo sound that they can switch on and off. And although it's a bit cluttered here, the region is here. It's in the 2.5 to 4 kilohertz region. And you can see the pictures going from the dotted to the dashed to the thin line, thick line. Those peaks get higher as these children are learning to project their voices. So you can train for it. It comes naturally to some people. Some other people find it harder. But if you just think of raising the roof of the mouth, that opens this tube up, and you can make that sort of sound without putting in any extra effort. But I don't need to in here. Thank you. So finally, we've arrived at the mummy. And the issue here was one where I was talking to a colleague in York, where I was working in York, about something we could do in archaeology that people would find interesting. So we thought we could take the bog man from the British Museum, who's 23,000 years old, and scan that. But British Museum said, no, you're not taking the bog man out of the museum. So John said, I know some people at Leeds Museum, and they have a mummy. So we talked to them, and they had a museum with a mummy in it, but very few visitors. And they were threatened with closure. So they said, anything you can do at all. So we then applied for permission to move the mummy from the museum to the hospital. It was about 400 meters away, across a large square in Leeds. And that, you can imagine the bureaucracy in the hospital and in the museum. It took 2 years for them to even look at the application, but thankfully they said yes, providing we move the mummy after 10:30 at night in an unmarked van and drive right up to the door in reverse, then open the doors and then take it out so nobody would see this Egyptian coffin going in with a man lying on it with a sheet on top. But suffice it to say, that was the plan. And the plan was to CT scan the soft tissue from here to here. Now you might say, 3,000 years old, what's actually left? Well, it turns out the Egyptians were highly knowledgeable about preserving human flesh. And the mummification process does preserve the human flesh, essentially as it was when the person died. So, next slide, please. And again. So Nes-Ammun, he lived in Egypt around those dates, 1099 to 1069 BC. Of course, it goes backwards because we're in BC here. And he lived during the reign of the pharaoh Ramesses XI. And he worked in this temple of Amun in Karnak, Thebes, Luxor, which is at the bottom right there. And this is the interesting thing. His daily work was as high priest to the pharaoh. And he sang the daily divine office. But even better than that, his job was to take the finest cut of beef every day, a fillet steak, take it through a door and put it on an altar, and then go out of the door, do his daily routine, and then only he, as the high priest, could go back in through the door, and any meat that God had not chosen to eat, only Nes-Ammun could eat. So he was brought up on fillet steak every day. I have no idea if that's still the case, but it sounds amazing. Next, please. That is his coffin inscription, which says Nes-Ammun. Originally, it was translated as Natsif Amon, and later to Nes-Ammun, the one belonging to Amun. And the belief was that speaking the name of the dead makes them live again. That was an Egyptian belief. And more importantly, he was given the epithet, I can't pronounce this, I'll say Mat Haru, or true of voice. But the most important thing was that this was applied to Nes-Ammun, and it's recorded in the inscriptions on his coffin. That's where this information comes from. And that at the top is Nes-Ammun in hieroglyphics. So here is that journey I told you about on the map. Leeds City Museum up top right, and the Leeds Teaching Hospital is here, and there's a big square between the two. It was 400 meters. It took 2 years to get permission. That's what he looks like in the museum. So he has a complete sarcophagus, and his body is completely wrapped in a shroud. Yep, on. And this is the night when we met in the hospital. He arrived top left on a trolley, which has a plastic cover in case it rained, which it didn't. There he is about to go into the scanner, and there I am looking at pictures to check that we've got the right settings on the scanner. The whole point here was to get a scan from here to here. In fact, we did actually scan the whole body, as I think we show next. Could you play the video on the right, please? So this is a bone scan. And on the left is him about to go into the CT scanner. And on one, please. So this is what we were doing. Could we get a sound from this vocal tract? And the points to note are, firstly, the soft tissue is present and intact. You can't do this with bones. You have to have the soft tissue. Second, the tongue. Now, the tongue is desiccated, which means it's lost its moisture, and it's very thin. It looks like a piece of meat. So it does not have the muscles that you have in your tongues. So that is a caveat to all this work. And the soft tissue itself is fixed in a stationary position. It's not flexible like ours is because of the mummification process. So the deal here was a proof of concept that one can get a sound from a dead body. What it is not, and I've said this many times on the media, it is not that we're about to synthesize Egyptian spoken by this particular mummy. It is simply, at the moment, one sound. And a static vowel is fine, because we can do that, because the tissue is fixed. Yep. So, just a reminder, this is what we've got. I think another one. That's the bit we're looking at. Just go back. We're looking at the vocal folds, the mouth and nose. There are no vocal folds. The vocal folds themselves were removed when he was mummified. But anyway, doesn't matter, because they wouldn't vibrate anyway, because they're mummified. So, what do you think we do for the vocal folds? How do we make a vocal fold sound? Well, we're going to do that electronically. We're using the technology that's used in speech synthesis. So that's how we're going to deal with the larynx. So the sound from the model, we need a realistic sound source and a 3D printed vocal tract. That's how we're going to do it. Next slide, please. And I'm using an inspiration from this man, Baron von Kempelen, who invented the speaking machine in 1790, which I've got a replica of. Could you play this video briefly?
This device is a replica von Kempelen speaking machine. Baron von Kempelen, in around 1793, built the original of this machine to demonstrate that it was possible mechanically to produce sounds that were speech-like. It has a power source, which for us are the lungs, and in this machine is this bellows which goes under the player's arm. It has a vibrating reed inside this box, which for us would be the vibrating vocal folds in the larynx to provide the sound source. It also has this leather bag, which represents the mouth for the machine, which for us would be the mouth or the sound modifier that modifies sounds as we speak. So to play the machine, you put the leather bag in your hand to vary the shape of the vocal tract, and you squeeze the bellows under your arm as follows.
Okay, stop.
Slightly more.
Okay, so that's a mechanical version. We're actually going to use an electronic version, but I thought I'd show you that because von Kempelen was known for many things, and the emperor at the time thought this machine was so brilliant that he was going to honor von Kempelen. But the following week or month, von Kempelen demonstrated a chess-playing machine which beat the emperor, and the emperor was so impressed with that, he said, "This is fantastic," until he discovered inside the chess-playing machine was a very small man who was moving the pieces around. So von Kempelen was then in disgrace, sadly, because he made two speaking machines, and to have understood speech at the end of that century, in the 18th century, is really very remarkable. So I have been working on an instrument called a vocal tract organ. Yes, keep going, fill the slide. And it looks like that. So it has a power source, which is an electronic oscillator, which drives that loudspeaker, electronic larynx source, and on top, a 3D printed vocal tract. If you play to that larynx source an appropriate waveform, a buzz, you get vowels out at the other end, and we've proved that by scanning humans who live, who also make a recording in the anechoic room, and we've compared the recordings, and they're essentially the same. So, quick demonstration. This is two singers and me playing the organ, so you'll hear the vowels. Right, so here we go. He sings, then I play, he sings, then I play. So I'm playing two notes, and they're doing the other two. These are on YouTube if you're interested. I've got the links. Next slide, please. So this is what we did with the CT scan. You put it in software that allows you to find the airway. So if you look at the three pictures in the top right-hand corner, anything that's red is the software filling in the space between the bone. So what I've done here is filled in where the airway is, because it's the airway we want to find, in order then to put a virtual sheath around it, and then take the sheath out of the software and put it in the 3D printer. Does that make sense? So that's what we're doing. And this is another picture close-up of deriving the airway. Yep, next. And there it is again. And this is what it actually looks like. That is a special coupler to sit on top of the loudspeaker, which incidentally I discovered in a completely different lecture when I was using the vocal tract organ in front of royalty for an evening meeting, that the thing that sat on in that other picture, that grey thing, apparently looks like a landmine. And it was nearly taken away by the police, and the vocal tracts themselves look like dog chews, and they were going to take dogs round. But anyway, that's a complete drift away from the point. So we make these tracts with a cut in them, because superglue glues these together so you can clean out the material that the 3D printer uses to create the tract. And this is it. So this is Nes-Amun's vocal tract. This is a bit like an eggshell. You could crush this very easily if you stood on it. You'll notice his tongue is sticking out. It is up there too, because this is from those pictures. And that's because of the way he's been mummified. The tongue is flat there. And of course, you don't speak like that because you can't. You can't speak like that. So the sound we get, which we're going to play in a moment, is not a vowel from a word. It is the sound that he would make if he came to life as he lies in the tomb. So here is the setup. This is the electronics of the vocal tract organ, and it's being driven by a slider. And as you move the slider, the pitch starts. So, but you have to move it to get some vibrato, so there has to be a change in pitch. That's deliberate because no human being can sing a pitch which is absolutely the same value. If you try, you'll find there are little ripples in it if you try and sing a note absolutely bang in tune. And this is the sound. And again. And you've probably heard that. It's all over the internet. It's on memes and mimes and God knows what else, where people have said, this is the sound of a mummy, which it is. But the mummy doesn't speak. And at the moment, that is a bit of a no-no, because people are very protective of mummies. And let me just give you one salutary story. When this was published in January 2020, I was just expecting it to be another paper, tick the box and get on with life, instead of which there was a media circus, which actually is still going on today. I still get people phoning up. But a question was asked in the Egyptian parliament. I wasn't there, but a question was asked along these lines. Why is it that a British research group using stolen artifacts from Egypt did this work? Why wasn't it done in Egypt? And that's the sort of thing where one has to have due regard, I think, for what's what. And I think if we start trying to say it's now speaking, that doesn't feel like the right way to go. But this is all to do with the ethics of research. But I just mentioned that because whilst this has attracted huge public opinion and interest, that's what we've done. And one day it might go further. But at the moment it's like that. Next slide, please. So, a special thing here. Nes-Amun is recorded as having actually asked that he can address the gods by speaking after death. That hieroglyphic, Nes-Amun, it has a link with the statement true of voice, and I think that's what Nes-Amun means. So this voice thing for the Egyptian scholars on this project was really special because of this address the gods after death. And I do remember the day that I played what you just heard on that last slide. I had my computer and I made this thing and I took it to Leeds and we sat around a table and had a coffee. And I played this. They were in tears and I asked them, why is this so special? And that's when they explained to me what the hieroglyphic meant. So this has been a rather curious journey. Yes, next please. Here's the paper. If you haven't read it, please do. But it's had a huge number of downloads. It was 442,000 when I last looked. As an academic, if I get 20 downloads, I'm feeling really chuffed. But this is fantastic, and I think you can put this into Minecraft. And once it's in Minecraft, you can ask it for the Lego pieces required to make it. So on my desk, I have a Lego model. Now, the scale is a bit odd. The vocal tract, this is 1-to-1 scale. This is real scale. The Lego is about this tall because, of course, Lego, the bricks are rather wide. So it's rather mad. But I didn't know if you have a thing in Minecraft, you can press a button in Minecraft, and it will give you a list of the Lego pieces you can then send directly to Lego, who will order it for you and send it back. And you can make your own model of the vocal tract, and I think that's the end. So in summary, do bear in mind your voice is very precious. There are parts of the voice you can't get back if you wreck them. And more importantly, dare I say it more to the youngsters than the older ones, do please look after your hearing. Let me give you a salutary tale. If you go to somewhere with loud sounds, and you have ringing in your ears when you've gone away and gone home, and there's still sound in your ears. Has anyone had that experience? Right, pretty well all of us have. Here's the critical thing. If that ringing lasts for a significantly longer time than the time of exposure, you have done permanent hearing damage. It is not recoverable, right? And I'm sorry to be the sort of bringer of bad news, but voice communication and music are so important to me that I'm very careful with my hearing, knowing this. Two things you can do. If you're out in a nightclub and you don't want to go home because it's really good and the vibe's there, man, and we're going to dance or whatever else you do, and do something about the transmission of sound down your ear canal. And if you put even rolled up soft tissue paper in each ear, you will double the time. It's about 3 dB. You will double the time you can stay in there safely. If you want to be better than that, you can buy little in-ear things, which certainly if you've got long hair, you won't see them, and you can still hear speech because people are shouting at you anyway. They can do it to a factor of 10 times. So just be aware of it, and the clue is if you have ringing in your ears significantly longer, let's say 10 to 20 times longer than your time of exposure, you've probably done some damage. And it's incremental. It's a tiny bit of damage on Monday, a little bit more on Friday. So it takes months before it becomes a communication problem. But some of you may know that you've damaged your hearing. You may know that. And there are other reasons why the hearing gets damaged, yes, because there are ototoxic drugs and other things that go on. But please look after your hearing, particularly the young ones. Yeah, do that for me. Okay. So finally, some healthy tips for your voice. Right, here are some things you should not do. Shouting, I think, is obvious. Throat clearing, try and do it gently. If you really have a hacking cough to get rid of things, you cough by closing the vocal folds, building up very significant lung air pressure, and then releasing the vocal folds. Huge jet of air which can damage the contacting edges of the folds. So if you're going to cough, do it, not bellow it. I won't bellow it with the microphone. Smoking is bad news for the vocal folds, I expect you know that. Fizzy drinks. Fizzy drinks make you belch. I know it's not very nice, but they make you belch. And they also remove the lubricating liquid on the vocal folds. And if you lose the lubricating liquid on the vocal folds, as he's swallowing because I haven't drunk enough, the edges will start to get slightly damaged as they roll over each other. Alcohol, same reason, because that dehydrates. Caffeine dehydrates. Chocolate, I'm afraid, is a no-no because it gums up the sweat glands in the vocal tract, so you can't lubricate your vocal tract because you've got chocolate all over. Same with bananas, same with dairy products. Now, bear in mind, what I'm talking about here are things that are bad for your voice. So these are things you should avoid, let's say, 30 to 60 minutes before you go on stage or you go and sing. It doesn't mean stop eating and drinking. By all means, enjoy your bananas and alcohol. Sounds like a great combination. Okay, let's see the good things. Water, excellent. Steam inhalation is excellent. Stop. Steam inhalation is excellent. This is where you go in the shower, if you've got a shower, and put your head in, open your mouth, and breathe in and out gently through your mouth. That is fantastic for your throat. So if you're typically having a shower, and I do this every time I have a shower, just 5 breaths like that, you will feel really vocally ready to go. Keep conversations short if you're going to go on stage, and warm the voice up, by which I mean doing, if you were in here earlier, what I was doing, simply this sort of thing, very quietly to yourself, just exercising the vocal folds up and down, just to warm them up, like you would your legs if you're about to do running. Herbal teas are good because they don't have caffeine. Citrus fruit, it turns out, is particularly good. So oranges, tangerines, those sorts of things. Lemon, if you can face it. I realise now, my mum was a teacher and she used to drive me to school and she used to eat a lemon. And I don't think she knew why, but she had a lemon every day. Tomatoes are good. And the last thing here is the one everybody gets really excited by. 1 glass of ruby port. This is not red wine, this is ruby port, which is the fortified wine from Portugal originally, is excellent for the voice, and nobody knows why. It's apparently got a chemical in it, but nobody's managed to identify it. But it is 1 glass, not 1 bottle, or 3 glasses. It is not cumulative. And on that note, thank you very much.
So I was wondering if right now we have a lot of technology, AI. I've seen people using AI to create vocal timbres of people that have passed already. So could there be any way that by using artificial technology to create from that one sound that the mummy that you have taken from the mummy to create the whole timbre so you can hear English or other languages in that?
Okay, so you're asking really,
timbre.
Would it be possible in some way to get speech out of the mummy's tract?
Yes.
The answer to that, in principle, the answer is yes. The question is, how do you do it, obviously? One way you could do it, which is the way that I would consider doing it, is we've got the shape of the tract. Everybody's tract in this room is subtly different. You'll notice this has lots of bumps and wrinkles and different things going on because our bone structures are different and our soft tissue is different. And we sound different. So you can recognize your mum, your son, your daughter just by voice, because otherwise that wouldn't work. So I think that's all part of evolution as well. But we know how we speak. Well, at least the phoneticians know how we speak. They know which bit we move, they know where the tongue goes, they know where the lips go. And so it would be perfectly plausible to take, if you like, a flexible version of this in a computer, yes, and find some way of moving it to match what I'm doing now as I speak. What you could not guarantee, I don't think, is that that's exactly how Nes-Amun would have moved his tract. Mainly, firstly, because his language wasn't English, and that obviously makes a difference. And secondly, because we don't actually necessarily know where his muscles were set and how they worked. But in principle, the answer is yes. There are synthesis systems where you can upload some speech from a deceased person that you've recorded, and they will create for you templates for their synthesizer. So when you get the synthesizer, which you pay for, you type in text and it comes back sounding like Granny. And as far as I know, I've not played with them much, but as far as I know, they are pretty successful. The difference here is, of course, we don't have a recording of Nes-Amun, so arguably I could play you a sentence that I could say was made with this, and we'd none of us be any the wiser as to whether that's actually what he sounded like. But it's a good question, and the answer is yes. It needs a new generation of researchers, and I think AI is huge at the moment, as you probably all know, for doing things, you know, pictures and writing stuff. And it can deal with a lot of data and sort of use it in an intelligent way, hence the I in AI.
Thank you for the interesting lecture. I have just 2 short questions. The first one is, did they close the museum?
Did they close the museum?
Yes.
No, they've been so flooded with visitors. Yeah. They've had to, Nes-Amun, when I went there, was on the 2nd floor in a corner, and nobody went there. And once this was published, they had so many people jamming the stairwells and the lift, they've moved Nes-Amun into the front entrance. So, yes, it achieved what they wanted.
Okay, and the next one is, do we have any other projects with another mummies?
I don't. There is somebody's done a little bit of work with somebody called Otzi the Iceman, who I think's in Norway, who's older than 3,000 years, I think 5,000 years. But again, there's less left of Otzi the Iceman, I believe. He basically was frozen. He wasn't mummified, but he's in the ice. So his body is maintained. And again, I think they've got one sound, but it actually doesn't even sound vowel-like, but who knows? We don't know what they sounded like. But of course, once you start, and if we do what the other gentleman suggested and somebody makes it talk and everyone gets excited, then people will start looking for potential beings. And ultimately, we might all decide we want to be scanned. So, I do have a curious project that I might get funding for, which is to look at using these to establish how you can improve somebody's voice when they've had a bad impact injury, which means they have to have surgery around the vocal tract, the jaw, so that one could then let them hear different versions of how you might rebuild the tract, and they can select the one they want, and you then give that tract model to the ENT surgeon, as it would be in Britain, the ear, nose, throat surgeon, to rebuild the vocal tract that way. That, it seems to me, is potentially ethical because it's going to happen anyway, and it could give somebody a voice. So it could actually put someone on the opera stage who's always wanted to do it, and they have a tragic accident, and suddenly... So that's a bit of a pie-in-the-sky idea, but yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was very interesting. We all know that Egyptians had mummified their pets. Like
say that again.
Pets.
Oh, pets. Yes, that's
Cats,
right.
crocodile.
Yes.
I've seen a crocodile mummified and other animals. Can you get a sound out of a mummified pet?
In principle, there's no reason why not. I did write to some of the British zoos to find out whether they had animals that were being scanned anyway by the vet for some other injury, and could they scan the neck? I thought a giraffe might be rather fun, but I didn't get an answer. But in principle, yes. I mean, animals have very similar, I believe, I'm not an expert on animals, but I think cats and dogs have very similar larynx and, okay, their tracts aren't the same. Incidentally, if you've ever wondered why animals can't speak, and this is another lecture which I don't have the details of, but the key to why humans have such interesting speech, and cats, dogs, and other animals that have larynxes and vocal tracts don't, is the right angle. Our vocal tracts have essentially a right angle in them. Remember, he's lying down, so his head's a bit back, but our vocal tracts go up and along. And that right angle gives our tongues, which are also different to the animal's tongues because it's a big, bulky muscle, the opportunity to close or shrink the back tube and open up this one because they bulk backwards, or do the opposite and bulk upwards, in which case they widen that and shrink that. So if you do R-E, if you just do that with me, R-E, 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 R has an open mouth and a narrow throat, and E has the opposite. The tongue's high here and the throat's open, so R-E gives us two vowels and other vowels in between that animals can't have. So we have a bigger set of basic sounds that we can string together into words. So the number of words we can use is bigger, and our brains are bigger to cope with it. And I think that's all to do with evolution. But my understanding is that human evolution, because of this right angle, it's as simple as that, gives us the potential for such huge vocabulary and therefore such huge communication. Thank you very much.